While retirement is generally seen as a time of relaxation and self-focus, God calls us to love, serve, and help others for a lifetime. He has been preparing us for this retirement season, literally our entire lives. In retirement, countless Christians enter a state of spiritual dormancy, not knowing how they are called to have an impact for God's kingdom. The Retirement Reformation seeks to encourage and empower the 50 million Christians approaching or in retirement to embrace the calling God has been preparing in them. When the world says it's time to stop, you can begin to have your greatest impact. Welcome to iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation, where our goal is to journey from retirement to reformation so you can say, I retire for Him.
Reaching out to the 50 million Christ followers in America who are approaching or already in retirement, you've tuned into iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece for the Retirement Reformation. I'm your host, Jim Brangenberg, and of course, I'm joined once again by Bruce Bruinsma, the founder of the Retirement Reformation. We want you to join us. Go to retirementreformation.org or iRetire4Him.com and find the resources we've got for you at the retirementreformation.org. There are tons of resources for you, including small group material that you can go through with your peers to talk about and discuss what's God got for you in your retirement years. Bruce has written several books, just a wealth of information at retirementreformation.org. You can also download our app from the Apple Podcast Store or the Apple App Store. The Retirement Reformation is the app. You know, as we enter into retirement, we deal with a lot of things that maybe aren't so pleasant. It's great we got a lifetime of freedom ahead of us without having to worry about earning a paycheck for some of us. But sometimes retirement can be lonely. Bruce Bruinsma joins us today to talk about loneliness and retirement and what we can do about it as Christ-following retirees. Bruce Bruinsma, welcome back to iRetire4Him.
Thanks, Jim, and I'm really pleased that we're talking about in our last podcast, we talked about anxiety. Now we're going to talk about loneliness. I remember the very first time, I don't remember how many years ago, but I heard the phrase, lonely in a crowd. And I remember when I first heard that, I just thought, how are you lonely in a crowd? And now in the world that we live in, I think we all understand.
Yeah, the COVID world?
Yeah. We can be lonely in a crowd. And so it's, I was looking for a really good definition to help us get our head around what this loneliness thing means, because the research that's coming out is showing us that amongst seniors, loneliness may be the number one cause or the number one contributor to a whole series of other issues that go along with that. So loneliness describes the negative feelings that can occur when your needs for social connection are not met. Now, when we're talking about that as a Christ follower, isn't that interesting? Because our God created us in His image so that, in fact, we could have relationship. What we did then was through Adam and Eve, we kind of screwed that up pretty badly. And so it's been a journey for all these centuries to see how do we come back to that relationship with God. And through the salvation of our Lord Jesus Christ and our willingness to commit our lives and our souls to Him, we have that opportunity to make that challenge, to have that opportunity and to be able to come back in relationship to Him. Yet as Christians, we see that this issue of loneliness is pervasive everywhere. And people have different needs for alone time. I know when I do, we've used something called the Berkman assessment to be able to assess personalities. When I assess my own personality, one of the things it says is that I need sufficient alone time to be able to make good decisions. And so that's a different kind of alone time. Sometimes I just take my Bible and I go out on our back porch and just, read. And Judy says, how you doing? I say, I'm doing great. And I'm alone. But it's just fine. I'm alone with God. But then there's those alone times when you just feel like there's no place where you can connect. There's nobody that you can talk to. Your kids don't understand you. Your spouse, maybe you're at a point of disagreement or a little distance in that relationship, and it happens to all of us. Or, in fact, your spouse has died. And now you are really taking that next step of being alone. I had a conversation with my cousin last Saturday, and she was married, had a number of children, divorced, and then was single for a long, long, long time. She's now about 2 years older than I am, and I'm 80. And 9 years ago, she and an old friend got married, and then he passed away about a year ago. So I said to her, so Beth, how you doing? I said, are you lonely? She said, Bruce, I'm able to hang on to the best 7 years of my life. That time. But now she is moving into another period of being alone. And so I think these issues of loneliness just spread across the dynamic of all of us. And I think we need to both understand it, appreciate it, and know what steps we can take.
Yeah, and that was something that, without the risk of going political, that I believe that our government officials ignored the significance of during the COVID pandemic, is the deep need for every human being to have community. And we alienated, we alienated and segregated and separated our chronologically superior folks from the younger folks. We did some of that to protect their health because COVID tended to attack people that were 60 and older. But it devastated our every age. I mean, I got grandkids who are teenagers who were devastated by being kicked out of school and having to work remotely from home for high school. I live in a neighborhood full of retirees, and they were so lonely because they couldn't go to the store, they couldn't go to church, they couldn't go to small group. I mean, it's been a hard time. And suicide accounted for almost as many deaths as COVID did during the pandemic. It's just a terrible, terrible time. But the good news is there's good news. And that's what I really want to make sure we talk about in our final segment of today's show is what can we do to deal with loneliness? How do we deal with the temptations to just end it all? And I'm going to open up our third segment with a story. It's something from my years of being, I'm going to tell you, I got a great story. Talk about loneliness. And then let's talk about what the Lord has got for a solution for loneliness. Because if there's ever a lonely person, it was Jesus. Because he was surrounded by all kinds of people. But there was nobody on mission with him when he's here on earth until after he died. You're listening to iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece for the Retirement Reformation, with your host, Jim Brangenberg, and of course, the founder of the Retirement Reformation, Bruce Bruinsma. We'll be right back with a special guest for today's show, Will Randall. Wait till you hear this interview. We'll be right back.
There is a move of God in our country called the Retirement Reformation. It's not enough to sit in the grandstands of life, watching the days go by with leisure as a reward. Join us back on the playing field of life, discovering God's plan for you and building purpose and intentionality into every day. Go to retirementreformation.org and click on the Resources tab. Check out our prayer walk and start ministering to your neighbors through prayer today. Connect with your ongoing journey by downloading the prayer app at retirementreformation.org. Click on the Resources tab. Make the journey from retirement to reformation so you can say, I retire for Him. Now let's get back to the show.
Hey, welcome back to iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece for the Retirement Reformation. Bruce, every second segment of every one of our podcasts, you bring in a special guest. Who do you have for us today?
Today I have a relatively new friend of mine. His name is Will Randall. Will Randall comes to us from Wheaton, Illinois, and the reason why I asked him to join us today is he's part of a career transition. If you remember when we interviewed your mom and she had a transition from teaching into counseling at age 58, Will is contemplating a career change, and I wanted just to have him just share with us a little bit about, because he's right in the middle of it. And so it's nice sometimes to have somebody past it and they can look back. But I thought it would be really fascinating to have somebody who's right in the middle of that career change and the thoughts that are coming. Retirement's, maybe 15, 20 years ahead in terms of another change. But Will, just talk to me a little bit about what's going through your head about a career change, because you spent, 35, 40 years in one industry, and now you're contemplating making a change. So share a little bit about the industry that you were from and what's going through your head about why now's the time to make perhaps to make a change.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on. I think one thing that is circulating is, our best laid plans, and how God can have fun with, what we might think our life could look like at certain ages, and where I thought I'd be at this stage, given some of the professional history, is a lot different than where I found myself. So, just to professionally have options for me to consider is a remarkable blessing, given the fact that in 2019, I was, working in a warehouse, minimum wage, not really sure, what my future, retirement would look like. It was just really a humbling time. So I think just to be grateful to have an option through some things that came to my way in during that time. So that probably is one thing. And then that whole perspective of I am, at an age where many are retiring. And then, my options to our working days, I just see things a lot different perspective. So I want to make sure I make the right choice. So I think the overriding thing is gratitude that I have choices and just wanting to make the right choice in this next step. And that really would be to finally, see what the God might be wanting to do instead of what I might want to do.
Well, answer another question for me. You came to a personal relationship with Jesus a little bit later in life. Tell us a little bit about that, if you would.
Yeah, well, again, it was, I thought we were talking about career transition now. That's a little curveball. But it certainly is the source of me even, saying I'm going to consider what the Lord might have me do is back in 2001. It was a tough period in our life. Our family, almost,
Came apart.
Yes, came apart. And I did not, I did not know the Lord, and nobody could tell me anything. I was headed to, ending my marriage and beginning another one, and nobody could tell me that I wasn't heading in the right direction until I got invited to a Moody Men's Conference back in '02. We were separated. My wife and I ended up being separated for a year and didn't talk to each other or see each other. And fortunately, during that time, she came under the care of a Christian church near our home, like right in the backyard that we had never been to once, but she got connected there during our separation. And I got invited by a man from that church to have coffee, and then the next Sunday go to a Moody Men's Conference. And it was there that, I was in a Moody church. I didn't even know what Moody was at the time. And I'm here, I'm in the church with 3,000 men, as this one guy put it, all standing in the air, calling for a fair catch is how he called it. Yeah. There's a guy in the Chicago area called Safe at Home. He wrote a book. It's a baseball player. But anyways, I just remember thinking of that, and I was very uncomfortable, and I really hadn't known what I had said yes I would attend to. And so I just but the guy who invited me was so kind and Big Ed, we call him. And then the last guy to speak at this conference was James McDonald. And I didn't know him, from anybody. I didn't know anything in the Christian world. And he told my story, but shared it in a way that a man that was coming to a church with a, woman that wasn't his wife. And he talked about how he challenged the man on his legacy and his lineage. And I remember how nobody could tell me anything. And that just cut me to the core, is that the decisions I was about to make, were going to affect my legacy and my eternity, the eternal consequences and the consequences on my lineage. And with that, I didn't know what to do. I just knew I had to turn. And that night I came home and I made a phone call to end that. And I went to the church where my wife had been attending, which was near our home. And I went when I went early because I knew she wouldn't be at that service. And I remember praying with a couple, they called you forward. I'd never done that in my life, but I remember going forward, didn't say a word. I just sobbed like a baby. And this couple, who my wife now is in a small group with, they don't remember this, but her and her husband prayed over me. First time that had ever happened. And then the next day I went to James McDonald's church. I looked it up and it was a big church. And I said, I want to see James McDonald. And they're like, oh yeah. And realized that I wasn't going to get in to see him. He was a big pastor. And, but I bought a book of his on the way out because I just he rattled my cage. I wanted to know, what do I do with all this that you shared, that last Saturday? And I bought a book of his, I Want to Change, So Help Me God. And I started to, I finally called a Christian counselor that someone had recommended. And, I dug in. I met men that, I ended up in this small group. I didn't know it was Christian. I just knew it was a small group and they're all Christian. And they all had a whole different way of looking at life than I had ever seen before. And they were, great guys. Just I connected with them. And it was kind of helpful for me to, this is, just kind of seeing a Christian life and having people look at my life and give me feedback based upon, how God would view it. So that was all kind of my indoctrination. My wife was loved on by this church. And then fortunately, my counselor called her pastor to agree to meet the two of us. And she gave me we worked it out. We were baptized. That was in 2002. We were baptized as a family at that church in 2005. And my oldest son ended up going to Moody College and lived across the hallway from James McDonald's son, so it's just crazy. It's just crazy.
Will, what a wonderful story. I mean, if that doesn't grip your heart, people, nothing will. So the way that God works, and here we are. And
hang on, Bruce, because we got to go to a break. And Will, I'm just asking, would you be willing to just hang on for just a minute so we come back for break and we'll talk about that job transition because your story was so powerful, but we filled up the segment. Can you hang on for another 10 minutes or not?
Well, that was just a test run, right? We weren't recording.
Oh yeah, we were recording. Hey, we'll be right back with more on I Retire for Him, the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation.
You've spent decades making financial plans for your retirement years. But have you done any life planning? God has a plan for your life, and it includes living out your faith in your retirement years with meaning, purpose, and intentionality. Go out to retirementreformation.org and click on our Resources tab. Download a copy of the book, Charting Your Course, and get started with life planning today. Simply download a copy of Charting Your Course at retirementreformation.org. Make the journey from retirement to reformation so you can say, I retire for Him. Now let's get back to the show.
Hey, welcome back to I Retire for Him, the mouthpiece for the Retirement Reformation. Bruce, I know that conversation with Will Randall didn't go where he thought it was going to go, but I am so grateful that he shared his story of how he met Jesus and how Jesus transformed his life. That was a really good interview. Nice one.
Well, the heart of that interview is really the answer to the issue that we're talking about. We talked about anxiety last week. We're talking about loneliness this week. We'll talk about fear next week. But his connection with Jesus and the change in his life is a version of the change that needs to and the reformation that needs to continually take place in our lives. I just wanted to read this quote, and then I think maybe you got a story for us. As you adjust to new circumstances, feelings of loneliness may pass, but sometimes they persist. It's not always easy to talk about feeling lonely, and if you have a hard time reaching out to others, you might feel even more alone. A lack of meaningful connections also contributes to loneliness, which is why you can feel lonely even if you have a wide social network.
Bruce, one of the things that I've seen is that the television, in a lot of people's cases, takes the place of relationships. People actually have relationships with their TV. They actually think that that's their friend. They have it on all the time. When I was 20 years old, I was going to college. It was a summer job that I had, but one of the major cable companies in Minneapolis was switching out their boxes. And I had a job of bringing new and installing new boxes in people's homes. And I'll never forget this. I just wish I had been deeper in my faith when I had this encounter. I went into this apartment complex and I was switching out a box, and this little boy was at home alone. And he goes, "You're not going to take away my TV, are you?" I'm like, "No, I'm just switching out your box." He's like, "It's the only friend I have. I can't live a life without a TV. It's just a kid home alone." And I switched out his TV, and he got his TV, or his box, and he got his TV back, and he was just so grateful. And I've never forgotten that kid. But what I've seen is so many retirees who have also developed relationships with their television. They've gotten sedentary. They don't do the hard work to get out in front of the people, or their legs keep them from getting out in front of other people. And their TV becomes their friend. And the TV is not a friend. And it's sad. But that's where, as people, those legs are still working, we need to do a lot extra to reach out to our friends who are maybe homebound. And really, the Retirement Reformation can encourage a lot of people to just get out and find out who's around you, who's a little lonely.
And when you are depressed, the things like opioid addiction and alcohol addiction and all the other addictions, those things then often come into play. And they increasingly find different things, different ways to take the place of your relationship with others and with God. We go read through the Old Testament and what the Israelites did. They continued to move away from God into other addictions that kept them from having that relationship. And so the answer to dealing with anxiety and loneliness is all involved in relationship with God, number one, and then relationship with those that he either puts in front of you, or that when you move, that you can be in front of, and that he calls you to make an impact on.
So get transparent with us for a second, Bruce. I'm going to take control of the conversation for a second. You're an executive. You've been in the spotlight for decades. And a lot of times people at the top, especially the CEO, tend to be lonely. Have you ever had times in your life where you were lonely at the top?
Well, I think that's a very common circumstance. We see that, I know, having experienced that personally, but also with the thousands of pastors that we deal with. Being the senior pastor of a significant church is one of the loneliest places in the world, because you don't know who you can really talk to and unburden yourself to.
Right.
That's why having a small group of close friends, people that you can trust, and you use that term often, people that you can trust, so that you can not necessarily unburden yourself, but just share what's bugging you. Yeah. And be able to have an honest dialogue that brings you to a new place of understanding, particularly when that understanding is a reflection of what God would teach us in following the lessons that Jesus had for us. I think you mentioned in one of our conversations that Jesus may have been in a pretty lonely spot for much, if not all of his ministry.
Well, I mean, you look at it. I mean, he was on a mission from God, not unlike the Blues Brothers. And that was meant to be funny. Come on, you saw that scene in the Blues Brothers, right? But his disciples didn't get it. Right up to the day he died, they didn't get it. So he was lonely. Nobody else shared the pain of being all God and all man and having this intimate relationship with the Lord, and the Lord saying, and God is saying, yes, but you're going to have to die, and it's not going to be pretty. But when you raise from the dead, you're going to have a relationship with billions. But so he walked out alone. Even the night he got arrested, all of his friends deserted him, and one of the 12 turned him over to the police. Talk about lonely, and painful.
You just prompted me to think about, on the Mount of Transfiguration, where God spoke and he had the disciples there, but he also had Elijah and Moses there. And it says, if you just read, there's just a couple of verses, and you read, and Jesus and Moses and Elijah were talking about what it was that Jesus was going to have to go through. And so he had a small group for a short time that did understand what it was that he was going through. And that had to be such an encouragement to him.
So, Bruce, how can the Retirement Reformation and the wisdom from your many years on this earth help people get through this state of loneliness, and what can they do about it?
Well, first of all, it starts with what what is it that God's calling us to do to reach out for others? In my own world, the giving leadership to the Retirement Reformation is part of God's answer for me. The ability to be able to reach out, be able to be reached out to, and to be able to have such meaningful conversations, such as you and I are having here, and that expansion, but with so many. And as I'm invited to speak at churches and other places, to be able to continue to have those relationships and to bring a message that's not a message from me, but it's the message that God would have through me out to the world, and then from you to others out through the world. So I think the very social context of the messaging for the Retirement Reformation is part of my answer, and for many of our listeners, that may be part of your answer too. So, come on to retirementreformation.org, plug in to some of the materials that are there, bring a few friends around, and have that conversation, have the difficult conversation, learn to be able to trust each other, and to be able to acknowledge not just the pains that you have, but the opportunities that God puts in front of you to use all of the talents and gifts that he's given you. There's the heart of the Retirement Reformation.
You've been listening to iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece for the Retirement Reformation, with your host, Jim Brangenberg, and Retirement Reformation's own founder, Bruce Bruinsma. We're Christ followers journeying from retirement to reformation, and we don't want to do it lonely. We ultimately just want to say, I retire for him.
Thanks for listening to I Retire for Him with your hosts Jim and Martha Brangenberg and Retirement Reformation founder Bruce Bruinsma. I Retire for Him is the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation. Most Christians tend to follow the world's pattern of rest and self-pampering during retirement. However, in your retirement, you can be focused on God's unique call to love, serve, and help others. This can be your best season of life if you take advantage of a life's worth of knowledge and experience and combine it with a greater freedom of time and money and invest it all in the generations both preceding and following you. The Retirement Reformation is encouraging Christians to find and follow God's call in all seasons and aspects of life, especially in retirement. Take time to sign the manifesto at retirementreformation.org and explore the wealth of resources available on our site. Join this movement of God and journey from retirement to reformation so you can say, I retire for Him. Go to retirementreformation.org.